Okay. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for your flexibility in our moving around the schedule. So Yasser Shoukry is here. He's an assistant professor at the University of Maryland. His research focuses on providing tools, algorithms, and new systems that spans both theoretical and experimental aspects of cyber-physical systems and IoT, with a specific interest on resilience, security, and privacy problems. He'll be speaking on sensor security.
So thank you everyone for attending this talk. So we heard a lot about IoT security, mainly from the I point of IoT, the internet aspect of IoT. So let's talk a little bit of IoT security from the T, from the things part of the IoT, especially about sensor attacks. So, okay. So, just a small pictorial aspect of IoT. We have a lot of sensors. This information from hundreds or thousands of sensors are being collected. They go to the cloud. We do a lot of processing there. But what is important aspect about sensors, the information collected about sensors does not just went to the cloud and stay out there. They got propagated back to the physical world through the actuators. So whatever information is collected by sensors, if any malicious behavior or if any malicious attack happens on this information, which is the input to our system, it will be reflected back to, and we can see the effect in terms of the actuator actions that are taken. So my talk today is focusing mainly about what can go wrong with these sensors. Do attackers can actually attack these sensors? Is it a feasible attack vector? And what are the consequences of such an attack? So my first message is physical attacks on IoT sensors is a feasible attack vector. And I will show multiple examples from different research communities that showed how these attacks can be launched in different scenarios.
Antennas. The attacker increases the power of the spoofing signals until they are stronger than the
So in this particular example, so this is one work by Cybersecurity from Cornell and UT Austin about attacking GPS sensors. And by using a GPS transmitter that is near your GPS receiver, they can start injecting signals that looks like your GPS with a higher power and make your GPS receiver think that the signals they are sending is the actual ones, and they can start deviating your vehicle or your system out of its track. And they actually showed just one experiment on a real yacht running in the Mediterranean, how you can use GPS sensor spoofing in order to make that ship goes whatever you like to go. Another attack that was done by myself early on my PhD on attacking the anti-lock braking system in your car through its sensors. If you go to your car, just look behind the wheels, you will find the sensors that are used for the anti-lock braking system. These sensors measure the velocity of your wheels that goes again to your ABS computer and take the braking actions accordingly. And we can show through experiments and simulation the consequences of such an attack. Just attacking one, so in this case, this is the normal ABS scenario that you are expecting. Now let's suppose that you are attacking only one of your sensors in your car. Now the same scenario, same software algorithm, same whatsoever, you press the brakes and that's what happened. Again, because these sensors are used in a feedback loop in order to actuate your physical environment, malicious inputs on these sensors can have a lot of consequences. People also showed that gyroscope sensors that are used in our phones and in quadrotors are very sensitive to acoustic attacks. So using a physical device like a speaker that can generate acoustic signals can start affecting the MEMS gyroscope in your quadrotor. So here you can see the quadrotor is a little bit flickery because we are inserting a small attack. until at this point of time will increase the attack vector, and that's what will happen. Okay. Power grid, same story. In power grids, you have power generators. These are big rotary machines that are generating power. They have to be always synchronized all together. In order to synchronize these generators, we have phasor measurement units at each of these generators. These PMUs measure the speed of these generators and communicate together in order to synchronize them. Two attack vectors appeared in the community. One of them, again, using GPS attacks, because these PMUs use GPS in order to do time synchronization, because time here is very subtle attack vector. So they use GPS attacks in order to make them out of sync. And by making them out of sync now, your generators will destabilize the power grid instead of stabilizing them. Some other attacks showed how you can hack into these PMUs and make them give the wrong phasor measurements. And again, this can destabilize your power system. Another example, in medical devices, researchers showed how they can attack the pacemakers implanted inside your body, again, using some physical attacks that can, igniting some EMI signals that can destabilize your pacemaker instead of stabilizing your heart rate. Infusion pumps, same story. Self-driving cars, cameras and lidars that are used in self-driving cars. All these sensors are vulnerable for attacks. So the second message is traditional information security techniques like cryptography, firewalls, and all these techniques offers no defense for such an attack, because the signal have been corrupted even before it goes to your analog digital converter. It's still corrupted in the analog domain even before it goes to your cyber domain. So whatever you will put later on to strengthen your cyber components is not able to defend against such an attack. So these attacks occur from the physical environment of our system. The same behavior can be launched, or the same attack vectors can be launched through the cyber components themselves. So this was part of a DARPA project called HACMS. So this is an interview in 60 minutes.
This is a regular new car. The masking tape is only there because we agreed to obscure its make and model.
We'll give them the illusion they control the car for now.
Kaufman has been working on this for 5 years with multiple research teams.
You want to hit the fluids?
Oh my gosh.
There we go.
There we go.
What's that? What's that? What's that?
That's the windshield wiper fluid.
No, wait. So this is something that a hacker hit.
That's right. A hacker. Like, obviously, you didn't turn on the windshield wipers.
So maybe the windshield wiper sensor is not the perfect scary scenario, but this is another scary scenario where they disabled the sensors for the braking pedals.
Oh my God.
The horn.
They're doing that?
They're doing the horn.
They could control the gas, the acceleration. They could control the braking.
That's right.
And they could do this from anywhere in the world.
So just stop with the cones here.
She thinks she's going to be able to stop right at those cones. Let's make sure that she can't, and she's going to drive right through them. We'll have complete control of that brake.
All right, here we go.
Oh, no. I cannot.
Work, right?
Oh my God. I can't operate the brakes at all.
So again, same message, sensors, because we rely on sensors in order to understand our physical environment, and all this information are popped to our controllers, and we use them in order to take actions. Again, any malfunctioning or any spoofing on this data can raise all these concerns. So the second question is, what are the consequences of such an attack? Does the attacker need to attack a lot of sensors in order to do a catastrophic consequence, or just a small subset of sensors is enough in order to have a large-scale attack? So the second message that I would like to share is, you can attack a very small subset of sensors, and you can create a lot of chaotic behavior in your system. Okay, let's take an example from smart traffic systems. Suppose I have a highway, have some cars running on the highway. The red car is a malicious one. The green cars are the good ones. Everyone is sharing their position and velocity into a centralized node that is regulating the congestion across the highway and rerouting cars accordingly. Think of it as your Google Maps that is telling everyone where to go and so on. So if I started generating what's called a Sybil attacks or ghost cars, I start reporting some cars that does not exist on the highway. So I'm the car red, I report some, I take the identity of another car that does not physically exist and share its position and velocity in an orchestrated fashion. Then I can start adding more and more cars that does not physically exist on the highway. This will create some virtual congestion from the point of view of the controller, and he will start rerouting the cars into the sideways, creating real congestion on the sideways while your highways are actually free. This is only one malicious car taking a lot of identities, can disturb the whole system. In order to have a better evidence about such an attack, we created this experiment where we use an urban simulator using real traffic data from an Italian city called Bologna, and we can show that by adding very few cars into the system, we can increase the average travel time in the system from 4 minutes all the way to 1 hour. Power grids, a lot of research articles showed that that different PMUs have different criticality when it comes to controlling the whole system. And if you are able to attack these critical PMUs, very few PMUs you can attack and you can destabilize the whole power grid. Fortunately, I don't have a video for this one, but it is all in simulation. No one tried it on a real grid, but at least simulations, high-fidelity simulations showed that this attack can get such consequences. So in terms of countermeasures, let me share with you a couple of countermeasures that have been suggested in the research community. The first one is on the sensors themselves. Can we harden the sensors such that they can detect whether what they are measuring is malicious or not? And the third message I have, that is feasible, but it is hard in general. Okay, different sensors have different physics, have different way of handling signals, performance issues, and so on. Still, I can show you. Let me skip this one. I can show you one result over here about, this is again from the anti-lock braking system that I showed before. We can design new sensors that have different sensing modalities in the way they process information coming from the physical environment. And you can see here we can distinguish between what is the attacker is trying to do and what is the actual signal that these sensors should have read. The other countermeasure that the research community is developing a lot these days is on the data analytics. Say, okay, suppose the attacker was able to hack into my sensors or into my communication or the software or whatsoever. Now I have a lot of information coming from heterogeneous sources from my system. Can I exploit this heterogeneous information in a smart fashion in order to isolate which data I have collected are the malicious ones and which of them are the good ones? So this work here by Miroslav Pai and Nicola Bezzo on, they are riding a car. Someone is hacking into the CAN system of the car, generating wrong sensory information coming to the car. And they are, this information is now coming to their laptop, and they are trying to analyze this information. It is a little bit hard to be seen over here, but you can see now there is an attack happening. There is the signals coming from one of the sensors seems a little bit like not the typical behavior that you are expecting. And here they can filter out all these signals, and again, using the redundant information coming from different sensor modalities, they can filter out which of them is correct and which is not. So I showed you this video earlier on about the attacks on quadrotors. We can do the same flight. Now we have attacks on some of the sensors. We are using the same technique on analyzing data coming from different sensors. As you remember here, previously we had a very large attack vector. Now we can detect such an attack. You see there is a little bit of flicker in the quadrotor, but now we are able to detect the attack, and we can bring back the quadrotor again to its safety region, regardless of having some of attacks on their sensors. For the traffic data example that I showed before, again, using information collected from the infrastructure along with the information collected from the cars themselves, we can detect existence of these attacks, and we can push back the travel time across this city back to its normal behavior, plus some degradation in performance, but it's very small. Power systems, similar story. Again, we can, using this heterogeneous set of information, we can detect such an attacks. However, we still have a lot of problems, especially in terms of scalability. So when we have big data, how we can analyze all this information at real time, because this information are then fed back to the system and they are used at real time or near real time. And this is an open research problem in the research community. A lot of different ideas that people have been trying so far. We can reach out to hundreds of sensors. We can detect if there is some attacks on, if our system have hundreds of sensors, pushing to thousands or whatsoever, still big open research problem. So far, I have talked about integrity attacks. We know that we, in security in general, we have three types of attacks: integrity, privacy, and availability. So let me talk a little bit about privacy attacks when it comes to sensory information. So sensory information can be used to infer much more than what you expect. So let me give you some examples. So here I will plot some of the sensor modalities. What are the, on the second column, I will say what is the typical measurements that you can get from this sensor. And at the third column, what other people can use to infer from these sensors. So smart meters in our homes, they are used for electricity usage, but people showed that they can use the same measurements in order to get your TV watching habits. Gyroscopes, they can be used to get your password on your phone, because whenever you are typing on your phone, your hand starts to tilt a little bit here and there, depending on where you are pressing your password. So just by getting the gyroscope orientation from your phone, they can get the password. They can even get the speech, what you are talking, just from the gyroscopes. And in many phones, gyroscopes does not need a permission in order to get their information. Barometers, used intentionally for pressure, they can use to get your location up to some error. GPS information, they have been shown how you can use them in order to get some inferences about health habits, about religion, so on and so forth. So this gives rise to the question is, while having these hundreds or thousands of sensors, what can be actually inferred about, how we can make sure that no one can use this information in order to get more than what is expected. Securing just the communication channel is not working over here, because you are disallowing people that from sniffing from the data, but the cloud itself, once it gets this data, the question is how it, what types of processing will happen over there. In research community, a lot of people talked about differential privacy as one of the countermeasures for such an attack. In differential privacy, you start corrupting your sensor information before giving it to the cloud, so that you disallow the cloud from doing its correct inferences. The problem with differential privacy, you start losing the meaning of this sensory information, and in many systems, once you start corrupting this information, you destroy all the information in your sensors, and as if you don't have any sensors at all. So an open question is how we can do privacy-aware data analytics. Finally, DOS attacks on sensors. Again, especially those sensors who are used for real-time operations or near real-time operations. Once you have a DOS attack on these sensors, the typical behavior of the controllers is just to work blindly. They just do, they go to a normal mode and they just work out there. And in this normal mode, you can harm the performance of your system. Think again about your power system. Suppose some of the PMUs have a DOS attack, they cannot synchronize the generators in your system, and you can destabilize the whole system. With this, I would like to conclude that attacks on sensors is feasible. Small subsets of sensors can lead to a catastrophic consequences. Hardening the sensor itself is feasible, but it's hard. Data analytics seems to be a better way to go so far, but we have a lot of problems that we need to solve, especially related to scalability and privacy. With this one, I would like to end, and happy to get your questions. Perfectly in time.
Can we limit them to like 2, 3?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe we have
All right.
10:45.
Apologies. Yasser will have to dash because he's teaching a class and has to get back, but he can take 2, 3 questions. So.
Yes. There is one question here.
How many IoT devices do you have in your own home?
My personal home?
Yes.
Mine, 0 so far. And the reason because I don't trust them. I have a lot of them in my lab, but I will not put them in my home because I don't trust them. Since I'm hacking them, I know how catastrophic they can be used. That's my short answer.
Can you have a definition of IoT devices? Because you have a home.
So the question is, do I have a definition for what IoT device is? Yes, but I don't put smartphones as IoT as per se. I understand that. Okay, in research community, there is no clear definition of IoT so far. Okay, so everyone has his own definition. Some people try to put lines based on the scale. If you have 3, 4, 10 sensors, it is not IoT yet because you need more. Some people say even if you have small numbers, but they are heterogeneous because it is called IoT of things, not thing. So they have to be different kinds of modalities. These are all the different definitions in the research community so far. You can pick whatever you like. For me, I believe the scaling is the main issue for IoT because that's what internet brings to the picture.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. That was very interesting, and congratulations on your work. What would you like to see as follow-on work, and who do you think should be involved in taking this research and going forward with it?
So that's a good question. So some sectors attacks on some sectors are more scarier than the others, I would say. Medical devices, automotive seems to be, this industry seems, attacks on this industry can lead to more catastrophic consequences compared to maybe small devices in my home per se. So I would like to see, hopefully, some standards related to to sensors on in these systems, making sure they are not being able to be hijacked. They are hardened. So far, most of the sensors are being developed in third-party companies, and they're just inserted as it is. So I believe this is something that needs to be taken care of. The data analytics, we need some standards showing that with high probability you can at least get these attacks. Like in aerospace engineering, you need always to certify your system that with high probability your system is robust against things that can happen from the physical environment. We need the same notion. We need to say that with high probability you have enough information in your system or enough redundancy in your system that can detect the existence of such an attacks or not. Please.
Is there any research being done on cross IoT type attacks? In other words, a building attacking something else or a car attacking. Are you seeing any research in that at this point?
So the question is, as I understand, is if there is attacks where you attack a certain system and the consequences with another system. Is it correct?
Correct.
I don't have something on top of my mind right now. Like a side channel kind of an attack. I don't have something back on top of my mind right now.
Thank you.
Please.
I think your presentation was very good because I think in the industry, of course, present company excluded, is a functional disconnect between enterprise security and device security. And I think understanding that would help quite a bit.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Please.
How autonomous do you think sensors need to be in order to?
How much?
How autonomous do you think sensors need to be in order to respond to an attack?
How much fast or how much?
Autonomous.
How much autonomous? So far, some theoretical results showed that there exist attacks that you will never be able to get to detect from one sensor. Okay, so asking the question that sensors can always detect attacks by their own is theoretically impossible in some scenarios. That's why we need always redundancy, and redundancy here does not need to be the same sensor multiple times. You may need different sensing modalities, and these different sensing modalities may be hard for the same attacker to attack all of them at once. And then the question is how you can exploit this heterogeneity. The answer is as much as we can, but we know it is not always possible for the sensors to detect the attacks by themselves. So they cannot be autonomous all the time. Okay. Thank you very much for having me.
So we are just checking on the location of our next speaker. Oh, there you are. Okay, great. Our next speaker is Carlos Bosch. He's head of technology at GSMA North America. He oversees the adoption and implementation of GSMA's technical strategic programs, ensuring that a consistent, interoperable, standardized set of specifications are deployed by mobile operators. Carlos will speak about end-to-end security and privacy considerations for IoT. Thank you. Couldn't see you there.
Well, after Yasser's speech, I'm glad I drive a vintage muscle car, no chips. Well, guys, first, good morning, and thank you for the invitation to share this beautiful day with you guys. Before I move forward, I would like to spend a couple of minutes talking to you guys about what is the GSMA. Most people don't know who we are. The GSMA represents the interest of mobile operators worldwide. Our membership is composed about 800 plus GSMA operators and 300 plus companies that participate in the mobile ecosystem. We have 3 priorities: to convene, advocacy, and operator-led programs. You can see here all the aspects that the GSMA touches. Our headquarters is in London. Our second office is in Atlanta, and we cover literally every part of the world. Our board is represented by the 25 major operators in the world. 4 of them are U.S. operators. We have representation of, I will say, the 100 plus operators that are here in the U.S., including the small ones. We work, in addition to the work that I present, we work in programs. We do collaboration with our members, and we develop work that is specified by their needs. The first one is identity. This is something that we're working together with the National Institute of Standards, and is to develop an interoperable and web SIM-based and digital identity solution. We also define the network requirements for Internet of Things, and when I say the network requirements, I'm talking about the mobile network requirements. We define and develop what you guys might be seeing about eSIM, which is the embedded SIM that is coming in some devices, and how to enable them, how to change profile, and I will go into that later. We also work what we call future network, which is how the operators will go to a native IP communications and how this should be working. Now, our IoT program or Connected Living program, within our website, you can find it by different names. We have been working on this for about 8 years. We've been focusing on low power, wide area, remote SIM provisioning, not only for the specification for the SIM, but how to manage it. Big data and security, how should this data be presented? How do we have a common set of APIs that can be shared between operators, between the industry, between service providers, and ensure that is secure and that is presented? And working with smart cities, automotive, and health. We do a lot of work on that. Now, what is the importance of IoT in our industry? We believe that by the year 2020, just the service for IoT will be 1.3 trillion. That is huge. By that time, machine learning research shows that about 15 billion connections will be forecasted. We also believe that by that time, 20% of all mobile connections will be things. And most importantly, 7% of all mobile connections will be using low power, wide area, which is something that I exhort the people here to work with, because like Yasser and some people explained that the crypto within components is essential, and when we make them lightweight for low power, it's getting harder and harder to ensure that they have enough bandwidth or enough power to authenticate and to run encryption. Now, what are these things? And these things, the universe of IoT is growing. It's everything that we see. We go from environmental indicators to my watch, humidity, temperature, wearables, street lights, CCTV. The main problem that we have, the diversity of IoT is so large that no single technology today is sufficient to service all these devices. That is where the problem is happening today. Now, what the GSMA have done, I'm going to focus today on what we're doing from mobile IoT. And I hope that my speech and this conversation helps to follow some guidelines for other industries. We have worked to enable connectivity of these devices. You have two camps within the mobile industry. You have what we call unlicensed spectrum. You guys heard of Sigfox and LoRa. And then you have the license spectrum, which is what the GSMA has been doing. We are working on LTE-M, narrowband IoT, and extended coverage GSM IoT. Now, the key features of this is low cost of modules. Ensure that these modules go from dollars to cents. We have been able to reduce the complexity, ensure that the industry is ordering an interoperable module that is all the same, and that is helping with that. We are, with low power wide area, now we can get better coverage. We can go farther. We can put a chip in a cow in Ireland, and that cow can roam, and we can go on the ground. Longer battery life. Our specification asks for the battery of an IoT device to last at least 10 years. That means you don't have to constantly be chasing this device. Optimization for low data needs. When you guys hear about 5G, you guys hear about a lot of bandwidth. But when we go about IoT, we're talking about a device that might just go to sleep, wakes up, send some data. We need to have a specification that is optimized for that. And two-way communication, which is very important, something that is needed today, which is I should be able to go to that device and not only read that sensor, communicate back to it, and be able to apply patches, to be able to change the firmware, to ensure that it's secure. Now, the most important with these standards is that they are interoperable, scalable, and they provide global coverage, ensuring that all features and security of existing mobile networks are inherent in them. Today, we have, I would say, all major equipment manufacturers and module developers working with us to develop these technologies. There have been trials in the US, actually. The US is heading the entire world in IoT. All major operators are actually have or are launching either LTE-M or Cat1, meaning they are moving forward. All the developers and manufacturers that I show here have already services and or equipment ready for this. This technology is now part of 3GPP Release 13, and it will be incorporated in the 5G standard when we all agreed. Now, this is a sample model of what an IoT should work in mobile. But the internet is not simply a technology that have become part of us. The UN recommended that the internet is a basic human right, and that all people in the world should have access to broadband services. No government should prevent you to have this. That means the Internet of Things is not really about things, it's about us. The human and digital experience is no longer side by side, they're bound together. And that's important to know, that it's no longer about things. We are Internet of Things. We have the wearables. We are actually having devices that will be measuring our heart rate. Hundreds of thousands of new IoT services will connect billions of devices. We are here depicting just a simple model. And it's important to know that the security of these devices and the lack of security can inhibit the deployment of IoT services and the growth of these services. It's important that we focus on security. Now, to do this, the GSMA created a set of security guidelines. And these are guidelines. They're recommendations for our members, for service providers, device manufacturers, developers, and network operators to launch. They are not rules. We're promoting a methodology to developing secure IoT services, ensure best practices. And I encourage all of you to download these guidelines. Be part of our forums. Be part of the conversations. We meet not only with mobile operators, we meet to the entire industry trying to find ways to do this. And today I'm going to focus just in an overview of these guidelines. I'm not going to go through all of this because we will be talking all afternoon. But if we look at them, we see that there is a possibility for us as industry leaders, governments, mobile industry, manufacturers, and others to come up with some guidelines that can be not enforced on others, but be recommended, be utilized, and we have best practices. Now, these guidelines focus about, I would say, 4 important things. The first one is availability. Endpoints must be able to constantly communicate with each other, end user and backend services. That's very important. When we did our guidelines, we ensured that low power wide area networks are implemented with a similar security to modern cellular systems. Mobile operators should support the same level of security for IoT endpoints and migrate this security across boundaries. Very important. We must forward the trust of endpoints even when they're gateways. And something that is very important, the power we need to work, and this is not a guideline that we have, it's something that we have to work on. The power constraint on land weight endpoints should be addressed. Today, these endpoints are becoming so lightweight that to be able to do authentication and crypto in them is very, very difficult. Identity, something that I appreciate the work that NIST did with the GSMA. We're using their guidelines. We are now presenting them to mobile operators worldwide. I'm happy to say that the identity guidelines that we agreed are not only being implemented in the US, but I would say 60% of the world will be using what we call Mobile Connect, which is the guideline that we put together. Every endpoint must be capable of securely identify itself, its peers, and its service. I should be able to have end-to-end authentication. It should be strongly associated with the endpoint's identity. Thus, Carlos has the access and the rights to use endpoints. How do we prevent man-in-the-middle attacks? Service peers should verify the identity of any users and the endpoints, and the technology that is used should be able to authenticate peers and services. Now, and Yasser showed how easy it is to tamper and manipulate these devices. We go into some guidelines into how that should be done, how patches should be applied, but it's something that we need to think how to enforce this. Privacy. Privacy is very important for the GSMA, and it should be designed into products from the ground up. Every action needs to be authorized, and every identity needs verification. I want to be sure that if I'm making a change on a device that is monitoring my health, that only me and the people that is authorized can have access to that device. And personal identifiable information, or PII, needs to be protected. That is very important. And there should be a method on how can we store and secure that PII information. Now, the security goes without saying. We need to ensure that trusted computer base is implemented in both endpoints and the ecosystem. That best practices is incorporated into the product or the service at the start of the project. Today, we are now doing this at the end of the project. We need to ensure that software or product development life cycles include a security life cycle. Today, we're not doing that correctly. And we need to have enough tools to monitor endpoints, be able to show anomalies that they are showing, and that can be malicious behavior, and being able to either block that device or take it out of the network. I think the speakers before showed that it's very difficult for a device to monitor itself, to be able to fix itself, but we should have enough intelligence in the system to ensure that the device is blocked. Now, in addition to this, the GSMA developed the specification for remote SIM provisioning. And the remote SIM provisioning is part of our machine-to-machine specification. That is a global specification ensuring that we have an interoperable architecture to facilitate the commercial deployment of systems that enable the remote over-the-air provisioning and manage of the SIMs. When we are now entering the IoT environment, most of these SIMs or EUICCs are going to be embedded in the engine of the car. It's going to be embedded in my phone or in my wristwatch. And there was always a problem on how we do this, because the manufacturers will be building, for example, a car manufacturer will say, I will create a interoperable profile that you can do, and then when the dealers or the guys that are going to sell this car into one country, they can go to one operator and encrypt, download that profile. In this case, I'm showing it with a truck. And by the way, the graphic is not working. The truck should be moving to the right. But the red operator will have a subscription manager managed by the GSMA, which we manage globally, that now that operator can have contracts with all the 20-plus SIM provisioning companies in the world, create an encrypted set of credentials, download it there. Things change, and then when that happens, maybe the truck UPS or the truck owner can just move to an operator B for a different contract. We should have enough tools to be able to do the routing or a subscription manager routing for that SIM. That is something that we have been doing to ensure that these credentials are managed for the SIM, that you have an OTA process, and you can move forward with that. Now, let's talk a little bit about samples. We're talking generalities here. Let's see what is one endpoint. I have a Pebble. It still works, even though it's not supposed to work, but they patch it. And mine doesn't have a hard monitor, but let's talk about one that has a hard monitor. It will have very simple component. It will have a Bluetooth for low energy transceiver and microcontroller. It will have a sensor that will pulse rate data. It will just read your rate data, and it will talk to that microcontroller, analyze that data, and it will pass it to some system. If we look at this in a very simplistic way, from a service perspective, the application of the smartphone or tablet will push the metrics of the endpoint to the backend system to some available network connection. It can be mobile, Wi-Fi, anything available. The back system for this application will associate you with the owner of that wristwatch and capture those metrics, present them in a database, store them, and then provide you some tools to visualize what was captured, maybe over the web or via an app. Now, if we look at this in a more detail, we need to ask some questions that should be of concern to everybody here. From the endpoint's perspective, I have to worry, do I have cloning? Can this wristwatch be cloned? Can somebody impersonate the endpoint? Can the service, there can be impersonation. I can just enter throughout the service, let me go back, and be able to say, I'm Carlos Bosch, and somebody can enter and being able to see all the data that I am monitoring. And if you are like me, I track a lot of things in my life. I track what I eat, I track heart rate, I run. There's a lot of information about Carlos that is actually in these devices. How can do I ensure the privacy that nobody is entering in this system? When we look at the service, we are having the same problems. Hacking, cloning. Is the device, it's having problems and it's being tampered and it's being used for some other reason. It's being compromised. Data loss. Is somebody managing the user privacy, copying everything? And how can I improve availability of this device? Now, the result architecture is this, in which now we are connecting this same way. It can be Wi-Fi, it can be mobile, but the result architecture forces us to break all kinds of services into separate tiers. Ensure that technology scale to ensure that we can work with spikes, separate the database tier and the authentication tier, like we define in Mobile Connect. Separate critical system from services that directly interface with the outside world. And provide a secure front end to help guard the internal networks. Now, finally, these systems, what I'm doing here is scratching the surface. I'm not really providing everything. What I would like to guys to do is, please, download the manuals, download our guidelines. Let's start this conversation. I thank the National Institute of Standards for starting this conversation with us. We're having forums with all operators. In fact, we are having the same forum with all US mobile operators next week in Charlotte. And this conversation, this forum, the new set of guidelines should include not only the industry, but should also include government, and it should include manufacturers. Now, I'm going to stop here, and I would like, maybe we can have a conversation. Questions, answers, comments? Quiet.
Will your encryption be similar to PKI?
Correct. Within the GSMA, when we do, there are two levels of encryption. One is for the device, and one is for the authentication of who's going to use that device. We devise a PKI that is being managed by the mobile operator, in which I authenticate for that device, and then that PKI is compared to the PKI that is saved by the network. That is correct, yeah. Very quiet crowd.
Sorry, Guillermo Christensen, a related question. SS7, a protocol that has a lot of people worried, and I know there's a lot of discussions, FTC is doing a lot of things on that. Could you talk about the association's view on that? Thank you.
We are, let me give you one example of the problems that we're having with SS7. There is a procedure called account takeover, which is something that became very public about 4 or 6 months ago in Germany. What it means is that I can compromise some vulnerabilities that is inherent within roaming and within interoperability of SS7. I can capture messages. I can impersonate somebody. And because banks, unfortunately, today send password information over SMS, I can capture that information and being able to then become that person, change what we call the forwarding of that phone number. I get the password, I enter to your account, and I take all the money. This is happening. It became very, very big in Europe. It's happening a lot in Latin America, and I have the I'm lucky because I get to deal with all these problems worldwide. What we're doing for that is we are expanding, because it's not that easy to change how SS7 works today. We are expanding how Mobile Connect is utilized, in which now systems can not only authenticate you as a subscriber, but can also detect, was that SIM swap within the last 24 hours? Do I still have what we call a SIM IMEI match, meaning does the chip in my device is the same as the serial number of my device? The operator today have all that data. Does that account has a conditional forwarding? That is being used today in the US by some web vendors, by the operators. It started to be used worldwide, and that allows you not to close the loop that we have with SS7, not to close the unconditional forwarding that the fraudster did, but allows you to do a second check and being able to say, I'm not going to allow this transaction because some fraud may have occurred. I hope I answered your question. Sir?
Yes, so you referenced Mobile Connect. I was wondering if you could comment on compatibility or alignment with the identity assurance levels for 863-3. Is there work by GSMA to bring those into alignment?
There is work with the GSMA, yes. I'm not that familiar with, I don't follow every nomenclature. What we are doing is we're trying to align with OMA. We're trying to align with the specification that our members, mobile operators, are providing. And the Mobile Connect is actually is based on OpenID Connect. And OpenID is a standard that if you peel OpenID, is OAuth 2.0 with some parameters to be able to identify better the subscriber, meaning we're trying to align as much with the industry as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, and now for our last speaker before lunch. Matt, I know you can keep everybody entertained for the next 30 minutes. You will. So this is Matt Eggers, Executive Director for Cybersecurity Policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. He guides the Protecting America's Cyber Networks Coalition, a partnership of 50 leading business associations representing nearly every sector in the U.S. economy on policy development and media outreach. Matt will be discussing IoT cyber policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. So I know I'm right before lunch, and I couldn't help but think about I like to study somewhat how individuals make decisions, and some of you may listen to the podcast Hidden Brain. I think it's Shankar Vedantam, who had a podcast a few years ago, and he did a study, or he highlighted a study that of an Israeli court system where, depending upon judges' glucose levels, they found there was a correlation between tougher penalties and glucose levels. So if your glucose levels were relatively low and you were the defendant, you were potentially in trouble. So I've taken the opportunity of maybe handing out some crackers, graham and saltine, so they should be coming down the aisles here. So anyway, Kat, thank you. Ben, thank you. Amanda, thank you. So I want to spend about maybe 10 or 15 minutes walking through my presentation here, if I may, and then take some questions, because I think that's usually the most informative, entertaining, and perhaps helpful. And so, a couple key points here. So, when we think about IoT and cyber, we're thinking about economic growth, and we really want at the Chamber, and our members say this, and we know this, that we want a safe and secure IoT to help economic growth, right? Growth is a big, big priority of the Chamber this year. It's a priority every year, but that is a high point of the Chamber this year. And I think, which takes us to the second point about smart risk management, we believe that industry needs to lead not only developing and deploying the IoT, but securing it, right? Making sure it's safe and secure. If we don't, we won't be able to reap the fruits of the IoT. And so one of the things we're trying to think through is how do we do that well in the context of policy? So smart risk management principles are very central to how we're trying to approach this. And so let me walk through a few principles and objectives. I'm going to highlight 5. But let me first say that there's a couple of groups at the Chamber that also tackle IoT, and I want to give them some credit. So, first I'm with I lead our cybersecurity working group, and we've got about 200 companies and associations. You'll typically see us almost every Wednesday having a call with our members on a legislative issue, regulatory issue, or some kind of non-regulatory or legislative issue, such as the NIST framework, cyber framework, or the administration's executive order. We've also got our Chamber Technology Engagement Center that works on IoT-related issues, and our relatively new Global Information Security Working Group. Some colleagues of mine were actually recently in Europe talking about the framework and IoT issues when folks weren't fretting about the GDPR. So those are 2 groups that I want to flag for folks' attention. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about here, our board of directors approved in June, and we also commented to the NTIA regarding bots in July. And I testified I think on the 3rd, before the House IT Subcommittee, House Oversight and Government Reform, on October 3 on cyber and IoT. And then the backdrop of that was a bill by Senators Warner and Gardner. So, we've covered how we've got IoT being more than physical things, it's services. You've got consumer and industrial IoT. And I think, as I alluded to, if not said explicitly, the Chamber believes that the revolutionary benefits of the IoT will only be realized in an environment that prioritizes specific activities by industry and government. So we as industry need to be managing risks, and sometimes I'll use a metaphor of a hot potato, right? We want to be thinking about IoT and cyber risk as a hot potato, whether it's that device, components that go into the device. As it moves down the value chain, we've got to be cooling that potato, right, for our own good and for the good of the folks throughout the chain, whether they're a managed service provider and then ultimately the consumer, whether it's an individual, household, or a business. Let me jump to. So the IoT is especially complex, as I think everybody here in the room knows, and webcasting. And there's no one-size-fits-all solution to cybersecurity. And that's kind of where we come in a lot of ways on dealing with policy proposals. So we go from kind of a lot of concepts to legislative or other policy proposals. Number 2, so first is no one-size-fits-all. And then 2, managing risk across the internet and communications ecosystem as a whole is key to growing the IoT and increasing businesses' gains. That's really key, right? I think we want device makers, service providers, and buyers to gain from everybody dealing with some of the vulnerabilities, risks inherent in this space, right? We want to be building in security from the outset. A lot of our leading associations and members, the companies, they get that. I think in a lot of ways they provide leadership for other organizations that really maybe haven't hit that mark yet. We want strong security, to be a win-win proposition for makers, providers, and purchasers. We talked about IoT security and cost. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'd like to make sure that if a company's building in security from the outset, they're rewarded in the marketplace, right? I want competition. We want competition. Competition's good, but I want a secure provider to be rewarded. I'm not sure that's the case today. And I think as Andrew, I think I just jotted down that Andrew Sullivan noted that you get these positive feedback loops, creating a virtuous cycle where a lot of different organizations and actors gain, right? We want IoT stakeholders to mitigate risks. So you don't have risks necessarily pooling at one stage of the value chain. And I think as most folks are aware, and I think it might have been referenced in the read ahead, but at least one Gartner study captures that the private sector isn't sitting still. And I think that the worldwide spending on IoT security will reach something like, or did, $314 million in 2016, which is a almost 24% bump from 2015. And some estimates, or at least that Gartner study, suggest that spending could reach about $548 million by 2018. I think it's fair to say we'd probably like to see that number grow. 3, industry will promote policies favorable to the security and competitiveness of the digital ecosystem. So, folks that are familiar with the Chamber know that regulatory relief and reform are our top goals pretty much all the time, right? Especially this year and in recent years. But I think the vast potential of the IoT will be realized only in a hospitable policy climate, right? We've seen how the growth of the internet, let's say in the 90s, was helped by minimal regulatory constraints. But I think at the same time we realize that we've got an opportunity here to try to secure the IoT better than maybe we did with the internet. That point's not lost on us at the Chamber. Certainly it's not lost on me. Today, leading industry stakeholders are more in tune to the importance that cyber brings to the marketplace. Quick footnote that we've got a sizable national campaign where colleagues and I don't lead it anymore, but I've got colleagues that do. They will hit major cities every year, about 5 or 6. We'll work with state and local chambers, universities, other governmental entities. We'll bring in folks from NIST to Secret Service, FBI, the White House if we can, to say to our members, using things like the framework is really important for your good and the good of your business partners, right? We're not just thinking about the individual business, right, let's say in the context of regulation. We want you to be successful. We want your cyber fitness, if you will, to be strong so you're not only successful, but your business partners aren't affected too. I think in a lot of ways you could say that we'll push back on regs so we don't end up in a potential morass of red tape. And let me be clear, and that's not so organizations can be indifferent to security, right? We want organizations to be managing risks for their own good, to be, I think, team players, to lead by example and help others, whether they're a competitor one day and a buddy next, and certainly not to be a free rider on the good work that a lot of companies do to provide strong devices to the marketplace. However, I think we need to approach the IoT and these new technologies with a dose of regulatory humility. And as I noted before, we want to be cooling that risk as we go. And IoT innovators are going to have concerns about liability. Oops. 4, IoT cyber is best when embedded in global and industry-driven standards. I think for folks here that is well known and well appreciated, but clearly for those that may not be as aware, cyber standards and best practices are optimally led by the private sector and adopted on a voluntary basis and recognized globally. The Chamber welcomes, I think it was the Department of Commerce's, or at least NTI's green paper that stated that there will be efforts to advocate against attempts by governments, foreign governments, I think primarily, to impose top-down, technology-specific so-called solutions to IoT standardization needs. I'm going to come back to the international theme in just a minute. 5, public-private collaboration needs to advance industry interests. That's a big deal. We can't do it alone. We've got to have government working with us, and vice versa. You know, 4 examples probably highlight the importance of quality collaboration. I've mentioned the NTIA Green Paper. I think more on that is coming. Second, you've got the NTIA cyber-focused multi-stakeholder process related to security upgradability and patching, which is extraordinarily helpful in the context of legislation that's afoot. Third, NIST did, as I've said many a times, and I'll be happily say so again, that NIST did an admirable job convening organizations to develop the framework. I don't think they could have done a better job. Fourth, the Chamber recognizes the principles of DHS's 2016 blueprint for securing the IoT across a range of design, manufacturing, and deployment activities. There were points about, hey, what should we do next? In our view, at least at the Chamber, is one of the things that we could do best is to help build on the good work that folks here are doing, events like this. And we've pushed Congress to help NIST, NTIA, Commerce to convene, do more of these so we can have a framework-like product for IoT security. Why is that important? Well, we've seen the success of something where businesses are brought in to help construct that framework. There's a lot of back and forth, a lot of agreeing and disagreeing, but it's a healthy process. There's an output. We can go push that framework to our members, right? Almost, does anybody really who's serious about cyber not know of the framework anymore? I don't think so. We can push it domestically. I mean, I have a hard time pushing regulatory tools, but the framework I can push to our businesses, so they say to us, hey, what do? We say, you want to start here. When we go advocate for policies overseas, there's been a big uptake with the framework, and similarly, I think with an IoT-like framework, or whatever we call it, would be very helpful for advocacy. I think it's hugely necessary. We've asked Congress to help in this space, so if anybody's streaming that wants to talk to me more about that, let me know. Let me finish with a couple of things here. So we've seen where bots, let me try to find my page here. A number of just topics off the top here, right, that we're trying to be engaged with constructively. I think I'm about the 15-minute mark. Medical devices, it's been great to see the work that our members have been doing, whether it's on the Healthcare Industry Task Force, which is at least medical device and IoT security is an imperative. It's been good to see NIST and CCOE work with folks on wireless infusion pumps. There's a practice guide. I mentioned NTI and their work around bot mitigation, the green paper and patching and upgradability. Self-driving cars, there's the NHTSA guidance, and I think there was a question about what kinds of things does that contain, and you've got obviously guidance and recommendations around segmentation layer security, security controls, information sharing, and so forth. We want our members to be buying into those things and supporting those. You've also got legislation on the Hill, the Self-Drive Act, the AV START Act. Those are good things, and our members are engaged in developing those. They've got good cyber components, and we'd want to see those in there. You've got smart cities legislation. And so, with things like the self-driving cars legislation, this is where a lot of the concepts kind of meet policy development, right? You've got smart cities and communities legislation. You've got a street act. I'm using acronyms that's pending that contemplates cyber, and we want to see that. There was mention of the Senators Warner-Gardner bill, S-1691, that would set minimum, if you will, requirements for contractors providing internet-connected devices to the federal government. I might step back and go, you know what? First point, I think they're right. Should the government procure strong devices? You bet they should. Then, as I think most of our work really revolves around, is that gray zone between good concept and then execution from A to Z. Meaning, you think about the scope of some of the definitions of the bill of the internet-connected devices that could be captured. There's questions there. There's notification requirements, right? Non-stop notification requirements to identify vulnerabilities and report on them. Not unreasonable, but what does that mean day in and day out? And you've got the potential relaxation of protections for companies, let's say IP protection relative to the CFAA and the DCMA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So we've testified on that. We've been engaging policymakers and staff, and we look forward to that. One thing I didn't mention is the NSTAC group. They've got a report that should be finalized, I think, next week, or I should say next month in November. That's my understanding. We talked about it yesterday. There's a lot of good food for thought in that document. I think folks will be impressed. Some resources just for fun we've developed at the Chamber and with other organizations. So that first Transatlantic Cyber Report, we did that with Sidley Austin, thanks to Cam Carey and his colleagues. That's a resource in terms of how we're trying to engage Europe on things like the NIST directive, or as we might think about it, the framework, and then data security, GDPR, and so forth. You've got the IoT revolution and our digital security principles for IoT security. There are about 10 that my colleague Vince Fosi took the lead on, working with Wiley Ryan. I don't know if Meg Brown is here on webcasting at home or at the office, but thanks for that great work. Then you've got the National IoT Strategy Dialogue that our colleagues at CTIC teamed up with ITI on, that was released October 3. So I recommend those to add to your knowledge base. And then I've got a longer statement that kind of complements these slides that may be up on the website. If not, just shoot me an email and I'll provide it to you. So I think, if anything, in closing, we get the fact that security's got to be baked in from the outset. If we don't, I don't think we're really going to be able to take advantage of the IoT as we should and we want to. But how we get there, I think, is we're really where the work is going to be. And then probably the last point is I'd like to be able to continue doing this, and I don't typically ask organizations to try to take on responsibilities to help us without trying to help them. So I've tried to make sure that folks that can help that are aware. So with that, I'll finish. Thank you. Any questions?
Sure. With NIST and the NSA saying in 8 years we'll no longer use PKI, elliptical curve, and RSA in the government, which would include Internet of Things, and the Chinese recently announcing that they're spending 30 times the amount that we spend in the United States for quantum research, what do you think of the role of the United States government is in, I mean, if we're spending $200 million a year today, and the Chinese are spending $6 billion a year today in basic research, What's the role in the federal government in spending more research, less research? Should it be private industry?
You know, I don't know if I caught the first part of that. The question was...
Well, the first part was we're moving to a post-quantum world in the next 8 years for encryption.
Oh, I see.
Currently, the United States is spending $200 million a year. The Chinese are spending $6 billion a year, including, you know, they're flying 30 times the amount of patents. So the U.S. companies will be blocked, in essence, from doing new devices because what's the role in the United States government in increasing spending or not increasing spending, or is private industry supposed to do that? What's the Chamber's position on that?
You know, I will say I have not handled that in our working group, so I don't want to be dismissive, but I can't really give you the most intelligent answer. But I would say that I think that there's a lot of room for doing more in this space in government marshaling resources with companies to, whether it's enterprise security or Internet of Things security. I'd like to see us do more. I think there are opportunities to do that. And I also do think that, at least in the context of whatever kind of bill or policy proposal, that we keep an eye on not only how we're doing, but how are we contending with our adversaries, right? They shouldn't have a free lunch in terms of hacking devices and companies. Anybody? Launch is calling.
I have one question.
Okay.
So incentives seems to have been a theme today in a couple of discussions earlier. And you also mentioned how you would like to ensure that the businesses that you work with and represent, when they do the right thing and they build the right thing, that they're rewarded later or recognized for that. Do you have ideas about how that could happen?
Well, I always like to try to go to a policy proposal because that's at least where things get a little bit more concrete. So if I look at one of the bills that are out there and it would say, hey, if you're going to sell to Uncle Sam, you have to meet certain requirements. And if we've got companies that provide those protections, right? I'd like to see those companies rewarded, and somehow we're going to be able to figure out a way to have that work in the non-governmental space too. One, cautionary note, at least as we've seen, is, there's talk about having minimum requirements, but at least our experience with regulations is they don't tend to be static. They tend to grow. And so there's a lot of unease about what minimums could be now, but what would they be in 5 years? And the folks that are thinking about the legislation may not be there to help ameliorate things, right? We've done work to try to harmonize regs in certain sectors, and we're not seeing the kind of ownership that we would want. But I think the general point is that if companies are providing secure devices, we'd like to see them rewarded. And in terms of in the private market space, if companies got different means of trying to say, hey, give me something that's more secure and it works for two parties, and then maybe it could be replicated to other sectors and companies, great. Let them compete, let them innovate, and let's see what we can get. But we wouldn't want to necessarily see government put a thumb on the scale in terms of some kind of conformance or certification model. Not yet, anyway. Anybody? All right. Thanks, Kat.